A young waitress fed a homeless man, but when he returned days later, her world turned upside down. Before we start today's video, I truly need your help. The channel has been slowing down, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and keeps our stories coming. Let's grow together. Drop your city or country in the comments so we can see where our amazing viewers are from. Thank you so much. Now let's get into the story. The rain had been falling for hours, washing over the quiet streets of Asheville, North Carolina. The glow of streetlights shimmered against the puddles, turning the small town into a canvas of gold and gray. Inside the Bluebird Diner, the smell of coffee and fried onions lingered long after closing time. Maya Collins, 26, wiped down the counter for the third time, though there wasn't much left to clean. She was tired, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones after too many late-night shifts. But bills didn't pay themselves, and dreams, hers of finishing her degree in interior design, weren't free either. Her manager Carl was counting the register at the back, muttering numbers under his breath. The rain outside had grown heavier, tapping rhythmically against the diner windows. Maya glanced out at the street and noticed a figure sitting under the flickering neon sign, someone slumped against the wall, soaked to the skin. At first, she thought it was just another late-night wanderer waiting for the storm to pass, but something about the way he sat still, almost invisible, pulled at her attention. "Don't even think about it," Carl said, not looking up. "Last time you let one of them in, he slept in the booth till sunrise." Maya didn't answer. She watched the man a little longer. He had a hood pulled over his head, his hands clasped around something, maybe a cardboard sign, maybe nothing at all. A puddle had formed around his shoes. She bit her lip, grabbed a paper cup, and poured some soup from the pot still simmering behind the counter. "I'm just giving him something warm," she said quietly, almost to herself. Carl sighed, waving a hand. "Fine, but if he causes trouble, you deal with it." Maya slipped on her denim jacket and pushed open the door. The rain greeted her instantly cold and sharp. She hurried toward the man holding the cup in both hands. "Hey," she said softly. "You okay?" He looked up. His face was shadowed, streaked with rain, but his eyes, blue tired and distant, met hers. He didn't say anything at first, just blinked like he wasn't sure if she was real. "It's soup," she said. "Not fancy, but it's hot." A small smile tugged at his lips. "You'd be surprised how rare warmth is these days." His voice was low, calm, too calm for someone sitting alone in a storm. Maya crouched down, handing him the cup. "Here, you can sit inside for a bit if you want. The heater's still on." He shook his head. "I'm fine here." He took a sip, then whispered, "Thank you." For a moment, they both stayed quiet, listening to the rain. Cars passed in the distance, their headlights sweeping over them like brief ghosts of another world. "You from around here?" she asked. "Used to be," he murmured. "Feels like a lifetime ago." Maya wanted to ask more, but something in his voice, gentle, hollow, told her not to push. She stood tucking a strand of wet hair behind her ear. "Well, if you change your mind, I'm inside till midnight." He looked up again, meeting her gaze. "Maya, right?" She froze for a second. "How'd you—" He gestured toward her name tag. "It's on your shirt." "Oh, right." She laughed, embarrassed. "Guess that was obvious." He smiled faintly, and for a moment, despite the rain and the cold, something shifted. It wasn't attraction exactly, it was recognition, the kind that happens when two lonely people cross paths at the right-wrong moment. Maya turned back toward the diner. The neon sign above flickered, the letters buzzing softly. Bluebird Diner. Open all night. She looked over her shoulder one last time. The man, who still hadn't told her his name, was watching the steam rise from the soup like it was the first warmth he'd felt in months. When she stepped back inside, Carl gave her a look but didn't say anything. Maya hung her wet jacket on the hook and glanced once more through the rain-streaked window. The man was still there, motionless, holding the cup close to his chest. Something inside her whispered she'd see him again. She didn't know when or how, but somehow she knew this wasn't the end of their story. The next night, the rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like wet asphalt and pine. The Bluebird Diner was quieter than usual, just the soft hum of the jukebox and the clinking of a coffee pot behind the counter. Maya didn't expect to see him again. Most people like him drifted through one night here, another somewhere else. But as she poured coffee for an old truck driver, she noticed movement outside the window. He was back. Same seat under the awning. Same tired jacket. But this time, he looked less like a stranger and more like someone who belonged to the rhythm of her nights. Maya excused herself and stepped outside, arms folded against the chill. "Back again," she said. The man looked up and smiled faintly. Guess the soup was better than I remembered. Maya laughed softly. It's canned chicken noodle. Hardly 5-star. Then maybe it's not the soup, he said quietly, eyes meeting hers for a beat too long. She felt heat rise to her cheeks and quickly looked away. You hungry? He nodded and she motioned toward the door. Come in this time. I promise Carl won't bite. For a second he hesitated, but then he stood brushing the rain off his jacket and followed her inside. The diner was nearly empty now, and the warm air fogged his glasses as he sat down in the booth by the window. Maya placed a bowl of soup and a mug of coffee in front of him. It's on the house, she said. He studied her like he was trying to understand her kindness. You really don't have to do this. Yeah, I do, she replied, grabbing a napkin holder and fidgeting with it. It's a rule. Anyone who comes back twice gets free soup. He chuckled quietly. That's a dangerous policy. I like dangerous, she said, then instantly regretted it. I mean, forget it. He smiled, taking a careful sip. I'm Jack. The name suited him, simple classic, with a hint of something old-fashioned. Maya, she said, though he already knew from her name tag. They talked a little nothing, deep just easy conversation about the weather, the diner, the smell of coffee that never really leaves your clothes. He didn't say where he came from or why he was on the street, and she didn't ask. There was something sacred about not knowing. Later that week, Jack started showing up more often, always polite, always quiet. Sometimes he'd sketch something in a small notebook. He carried his hand surprisingly steady for someone who looked so worn down. Other times, he'd just sit in silence, watching the world through the rain-specked glass. Maya started to notice things. He never asked for money, never looked at his phone, he didn't even seem to have one. He read whatever old newspaper was lying around and always cleaned up after himself before leaving. Carl teased her one night. Your boyfriend's back again, he said, stacking plates behind the counter. He's not my boyfriend, Maya shot back too quickly. Carl smirked. Right, you just smile every time he walks in. Maya rolled her eyes but couldn't stop the tiny grin tugging at her lips. That evening, the power flickered from the storm outside, and half the diner went dark. The jukebox died mid-song, and for a moment, the world felt still. Jack looked up from his notebook and said, You got a flashlight. In the back, she said, but it's a mess in there. He stood. I'll help. Together, they rummaged through boxes until they found one. As Maya turned it on, the beam of light brushed across Jack's face, sharp jaw, stubble eyes that carried a weight she couldn't name. Got it, she said softly. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You always this kind to strangers. She shrugged. I don't know. Maybe I just like to believe people can be better than their worst day. He nodded slowly, voice low. You'd be surprised how rare that is. For the first time, she caught a glimpse of something behind his calm exterior, a shadow of regret. But before she could ask, Carl called out from the front, and Jack stepped back, fading into the dim light like a memory. When the lights came back on, he was gone. But the next night, he returned again, sitting at his usual spot. This time, he told her he used to build things, machines, small inventions, projects that never saw the light of day. She listened, fascinated. You were an engineer. Something like that, he said. But I stopped, lost the spark. What happened? She asked gently. He hesitated, staring down at his hands. Sometimes life gives you too much of what you thought you wanted. And then one mistake changes everything. Maya didn't push. She could tell it wasn't about work. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't need words. Rain began again, tapping softly against the windows. Maya poured him another coffee, and he smiled as the steam rose between them. Sometimes connection doesn't come from stories. It comes from silence, the kind that lets two broken souls breathe in the same space. That night, when her shift ended, Jack was still there. She handed him an umbrella she'd found in the lost and found bin. It's a little bent, but it works. He took it, his fingers brushing hers, just slightly. You really don't give up on people, do you? Maybe not, she said. But it doesn't mean I don't get tired. He looked at her for a long time, then nodded. Then let me walk you home, just to make sure you don't get tired alone. She almost said no, but something in his voice, steady, sincere, made her say yes. They walked down Main Street puddles, reflecting the yellow streetlights. He didn't talk much, but his presence was calm, safe. When they reached her apartment, she turned to him and said, See you tomorrow. He gave a small smile. If the soup's still warm. Maya laughed, waving as he disappeared into the rain. She didn't know why, but that night she left the diner lights on just a little longer, like she was saving a place for him. Autumn crept slowly into Asheville. The air turned crisp, and the trees around Main Street began to burn gold and red. The Bluebird Diner started serving pumpkin pie again, and the regulars swapped their iced coffee for hot chocolate. Maya had begun to notice small things about Jack, things that most people wouldn't see. The way he always sat with his back to the wall, facing the door. The way he tapped his thumb twice against the edge of his mug before taking a sip. The way he seemed to know the weather before anyone else did, glancing at the windows like he could hear the next storm coming. He wasn't just another drifter. There was something disciplined, deliberate, almost careful about him. Most nights he'd sketch in that small notebook of his. Maya had tried to peek once, but he always closed it gently before she could. Trade secret, he'd said with that half smile. One slow evening, the diner was nearly empty. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, melting as they hit the wet pavement. Maya leaned over the counter. "So you just gonna sit there, drawing mysterious stuff forever, or are you gonna show me what's in that thing?" Jack chuckled. "You wouldn't be impressed. Try me." After a moment, he turned the notebook around. Inside was a pencil sketch of the diner, the neon sign glowing her figure faintly visible through the window, head tilted as she poured coffee. Maya blinked. "You drew this?" He nodded. "You make this place look alive." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The jukebox hummed quietly in the corner, and the smell of coffee drifted through the air. "I thought you said you used to build machines," she said. "I did," he replied. "But sometimes when life gets too mechanical, you forget how to see the world. Drawing helps me remember." She smiled softly. "Guess we're both trying to remember something." Jack looked up. "What's that?" "That there's more to life than just getting by," she said. He studied her face for a long second before closing the notebook. "Then maybe you're already ahead of me." Over the next few weeks, Jack became part of the diner's rhythm. He'd help fix little things, tighten a loose hinge, replace a flickering bulb, even repair the old jukebox that hadn't worked in months. Carl started warming up to him too. "That guy's handy," he admitted one night. "You sure he's homeless?" Maya shrugged. "He's Jack." There was no better explanation. Sometimes, after her shift, they'd sit outside on the back steps with 2 mugs of coffee. They didn't always talk. Some nights, they just watched the quiet town breathing under the streetlights. "You ever feel like the world's moving too fast?" Maya asked once. "All the time," Jack said. "That's why I stopped trying to chase it." She smiled. "Yeah, but if you stop running, don't you get left behind?" He looked at her thoughtful. "Maybe. Or maybe you finally noticed the view." One Friday night, Maya found him standing behind the diner after closing, staring up at the sky. The first real snow was falling now, soft and slow. She stepped beside him. "It's beautiful," she said. Jack nodded. "Haven't seen snow in a long time." "Where were you before Asheville?" He hesitated, eyes still on the snow. "North. Boston for a while. Then nowhere for a bit." "Nowhere." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, you'd be surprised how many places are in the middle of nowhere." Maya chuckled, hugging her jacket tighter. "You talk like someone who's seen too much." "Maybe I have," he said quietly. She glanced up at him, the snow settling in his hair, the soft glow of the streetlight outlining his profile. There was a calm sadness in him, a stillness that felt both peaceful and lonely. Something in her chest tightened. Before she could say anything, he turned to her. "You should go home. It's late." "What about you?" He smiled. "I'll be fine." "You always say that," she said, "and it's always true." She shook her head, smiling despite herself. "You're impossible." "Yeah," he murmured. "I get that a lot." The next morning when she came in for her shift, she found something taped to the coffee machine. A sketch. It was her again, but this time she was smiling. At the bottom, written in small, neat handwriting, were the words, "Some people light up a place just by showing up." Her heart caught for a second. She folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into her apron pocket. Carl noticed the look on her face. "What's that?" Nothing, she said quickly, but her cheeks betrayed her. "Uh-huh," Carl said, smirking. "The mystery artist strikes again." Over the next few nights, Jack and Maya fell into a rhythm, shared glances, quiet laughter, moments that felt like something more, but neither of them said the word love. It was too early, too fragile. And maybe deep down, both of them were afraid to break the spell. One night, as she wiped the counter, she asked Jack, "What would you do if you could start over?" He thought for a long moment. "I'd probably build something that couldn't break so easily." "A machine?" she teased. "A life," he said softly. Maya froze the rag still in her hand. "You talk like someone who lost a lot." Jack looked down at his hands. "Maybe I did." And then, as if realizing he'd said too much, he stood up. "Thanks for the soup, Maya. See you around." Before she could say anything, he was gone out into the falling snow, disappearing into the quiet night. That evening, Maya closed the diner alone. The jukebox played a soft blues tune in the background, and the lights cast a golden glow across the empty booths. She walked to the window, watching the snowflakes drift under the streetlight. Somewhere out there, Jack was walking through that snow, carrying a notebook, and secrets she still didn't understand. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she already missed him. Sometimes connection isn't loud or obvious. Sometimes it's a quiet pull, a heartbeat in the distance, calling you back to someone you barely know, but can't stop thinking about. Maya turned off the lights, grabbed her coat, and stepped out into the cold night. The wind bit her cheeks, and she smiled softly to herself. Tomorrow, she thought, he'll come back tomorrow. The snow didn't stop for 3 days. It blanketed Asheville in silence, turning the streets white and the diner windows foggy. The Bluebird Diner became a kind of refuge, truckers, travelers, and locals hiding from the cold. But Jack didn't come back. At first, Maya didn't worry. Maybe he'd found shelter, or maybe he was sketching somewhere warm. But when the 4th night came and went without a sign of him, something inside her began to twist. By the 6th night, she was checking every alley near Main Street after her shift. The people she asked just shook their heads. Tall guy, dark coat, quiet, one of the vendors said. Haven't seen him. The following week, she couldn't focus. Every time the doorbell jingled, she turned too quickly, hoping it was him. It never was. Carl finally noticed. You keep glancing at that door like you're waiting for Santa, he said, leaning against the counter. Maya tried to laugh it off, just making sure customers don't freeze outside. Right, Carl said. Or maybe you're missing your artist friend. She ignored him, pouring another cup of coffee. But when she looked down, her hand was shaking. On the 9th night, the snow turned to rain. The streets glistened again under the soft hum of streetlights. Maya stood outside after closing umbrella in hand, staring at the empty sidewalk. She whispered to no one, "You promise tomorrow." The wind carried her words away. 2 days later it happened. It was late afternoon, the kind of day where the sky can't decide between rain and sun. The diner had just started to fill up again after the storm. Maya was refilling sugar jars when the sound of tires crunching on wet pavement made her glance outside. A sleek black SUV pulled up in front of the diner. The windows were tinted, the kind of car that didn't belong on this street. The door opened and Jack stepped out. Her breath caught. He wasn't wearing his old jacket. His hair was trimmed, his face clean-shaven. A dark wool coat, polished shoes, and a silver watch glinted under his sleeve. He looked different, not just cleaned up, transformed. She froze as he pushed open the diner door. The small bell chimed like a sound she'd heard 1,000 times before, but now it made her heart race. "Maya," he said softly. Her name sounded strange on his lips now, formal somehow. "Jack," she whispered, what happened to you?" Every conversation in the diner seemed to fade into silence. Even Carl looked up from the kitchen window, blinking. Jack's eyes were steady. "Can we talk?" They sat in the booth by the window, the same one where he used to sketch. The rain tapped gently against the glass. "I know I disappeared," he began. "And I'm sorry. There's a lot I need to explain." Maya folded her arms. "Start with where you went." He exhaled, fingers running along the edge of his cup. "I wasn't who you thought I was." "Meaning?" "I wasn't homeless. I was hiding." She blinked, trying to process the words. Hiding from what? "From everything," he said quietly. "From a life I built and destroyed. My name's not just Jack Dawson. It's Jack Dawson Reed." The name didn't mean anything to her until he added Reed Technologies. Her eyes widened. "You mean like the robotics company?" He nodded once. "I started it 10 years ago, and then last year, there was an accident." Maya's voice softened. "What kind of accident?" He looked down at his hands. "A test malfunction. One of my team members, my best friend, didn't make it. I was driving that night. I thought I could fix everything, but all I did was break it worse. I walked away, left the company. The press said I disappeared. Maybe they were right." Silence filled the booth. Only the rain dared to move. "So, all that time," Maya said slowly, "when you sat out there in the cold." He nodded. "I wasn't looking for sympathy. I was looking for something real. And then you came out with that bowl of soup, and it felt like the first real thing I'd seen in a year." Maya's throat tightened. "You could have told me." "I wanted to," he said. "But for the first time in my life, someone looked at me and didn't see money or failure or headlines. You just saw me. I didn't want to lose that." Her voice cracked. "But you lied. You made me think you were someone else." "I didn't lie," he said softly. "I just didn't tell you everything." That's the same thing she whispered standing from the booth. Do you know what it's like to wonder if someone you care about is out there freezing when really they're probably sleeping in a house with heat and running water? Jack flinched at the edge in her tone. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said. But you did, she replied, her voice trembling. You disappeared. You made me feel stupid for caring. He stood too, his expression raw. Maya, please. She shook her head. I need some air. She turned and walked toward the back door, her reflection flashing in the diner's glass as she passed. Jack stood there, silent, watching her go. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Maya leaned against the brick wall, the cold biting through her jacket. Her heart pounded in her chest. The man she thought she knew, the man who sat quietly drawing in the corner, who drank cheap coffee and smiled at her jokes, wasn't real. And yet, she couldn't forget the way he'd looked at her like she was the only part of the world that still made sense. Sometimes the truth doesn't shatter you all at once. It cracks you slowly, one breath, one heartbeat, one realization at a time. When she finally went back inside, Jack was gone. All that remained was a folded napkin on the table. On it, a quick sketch of her standing in the doorway, rain falling behind her. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, for the woman who reminded me what it means to come home. Maya held the napkin in her hands, her eyes stinging. The bell above the diner door jingled softly in the empty room. Jack had disappeared again, only this time it hurt for real. The snow melted, leaving the streets of Asheville slick and gray. Days passed, then a week, but Jack didn't come back to the Bluebird Diner. The booth by the window sat empty, his coffee cup gone, his sketches tucked away in Maya's apron pocket. Every time she looked at that napkin drawing, her chest tightened. Carl noticed the change. You're quiet, he said one night, wiping the counter beside her. Long week, she answered. He looked at her for a moment, then sighed. Sometimes folks leave because they don't know how to stay. Maya didn't reply. She just kept staring at the empty booth, wondering if she had meant anything to him at all. 3 nights later, she found out where he'd gone. It was close to midnight when a black SUV stopped outside the diner again. Jack stepped out this time without the expensive coat, just a simple sweater and tired eyes. He hesitated before walking in. Carl looked up. He's back, he muttered, handing Maya a dish rag like it was a shield. Maya froze. Tell him we're closed. We're open another 10 minutes, then close early. But before she could move, Jack was already standing at the counter. Maya, he said quietly. She turned jaw tight. What are you doing here? I need to explain. You already did, she said, grabbing a tray. You lied, disappeared, and turned my life into some kind of movie plot. Explanation received. He stepped closer. I didn't come to defend myself. I came because you deserved the truth, all of it. She stared at him. Part of her wanted to throw him out. Another part, one she didn't want to admit, wanted to listen. Fine, she said at last. Talk. Jack took a breath. When I left that night after the snow, I went back to see the site of the accident. I thought maybe I could make peace with it. But it's not something you make peace with. It just follows you. He looked down at his hands. I was the one driving. We were testing a prototype, an autonomous safety system. It malfunctioned. My best friend Eric was in the passenger seat. Maya's voice softened. You said you blamed yourself. I didn't just blame myself, he said quietly. I was guilty. I ignored a warning, pushed the test anyway because I wanted to prove we were ready. He died because of me. The diner fell silent. Even Carl from across the room stopped moving. I lost everything after that, Jack continued. The company, the trust, my fiancé. Reporters camped outside my house calling me a murderer. So I left, changed my name, lived on the streets until I ended up here. He met her eyes. That night, you gave me soup. It was the first time in months anyone had looked at me like a person. You didn't know my name, my story. You just saw someone cold and hungry. I didn't know how to repay that except by being honest about who I was when I finally could. Maya swallowed hard. But you weren't honest. Not until now. I know, he said. I was afraid that if you saw the rest of me, you'd stop seeing the part you cared for. She shook her head. You don't get it, Jack. You let me care. You let me believe you were someone who needed me when really you were someone hiding from himself. His voice broke. I needed you more than I've ever needed anything. Then why disappear again? I didn't want to drag you into my mess. The board wants me back. The press found out I'm here. I thought leaving was protecting you. Maya gave a bitter laugh. You don't protect someone by vanishing. You just teach them not to trust. Jack stepped forward. You're right. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I came here hoping you might understand that everything I said, every word I meant, it was real. She blinked back tears. You think words fix anything? You broke something, Jack. And not the company or the machines, me. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rain began again tapping against the windows like the slow beating of a heart trying to remember its rhythm. Finally, Jack reached into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope. I was going to give you this the night I told you who I was. She hesitated, then took it. Inside was a check more money than she'd ever seen. Her name written across the top. What is this? She whispered. An investment, he said. For your design program. You once told me dreams cost money. I wanted to help. She stared at it, anger and heartbreak twisting together. You really don't understand, do you? You can't buy your way out of guilt, and you sure can't buy me. He stepped back, ashamed. That wasn't what I meant. Then what do you want from me? Jack's eyes were wet now, his voice shaking. I just want you to know I'm trying. I want to build something good again, and I wanted it to start with you. Maya looked at him for a long time. Then she placed the check back on the counter. If you really want to fix something, start with yourself. She turned and walked toward the back door. The night air rushed in as she stepped outside, rain slicking her hair to her face. Jack didn't follow. He just stood there, watching her silhouette fade into the dark. For days afterward, the diner felt heavier. The sketch still hung near the coffee machine, but Maya couldn't look at it. She tried to focus on work, on customers, on anything else. But her heart refused to forget. She thought of his words, the accident, the guilt, the pain. She understood now why he looked at the world like it was something fragile, but understanding didn't erase the hurt. That Sunday morning, she drove to the overlook above town, a quiet spot she used to visit with her mom before she passed. The fog rolled through the valley below the mountains, rising like shadows. She sat on the hood of her car, holding the napkin sketch. I loved someone who didn't even know how to stay, she whispered. But even as she said it, she felt something else, pity not for herself, but for him. Jack wasn't cruel. He was broken, maybe more than she realized. The wind picked up, and she folded the napkin back into her jacket pocket. That evening, she returned to the diner early. The air smelled like coffee and fresh biscuits again. She was setting up the counter when the bell above the door chimed softly. Jack stood there, no suit, no SUV, just jeans, a faded hoodie, and eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in days. Before she could speak, he said, "You don't have to say anything. I just needed to tell you something." She crossed her arms. "You seem to like doing that." He smiled sadly. "Maybe talking is all I'm good at now." She sighed. "Then talk." Jack took a deep breath. "Eric's sister reached out to me last week. She said she forgave me. Not because I earned it, but because she couldn't live carrying hate anymore. That made me realize something. I don't want to live hiding from forgiveness, even if I never get it. So this is me saying, thank you for showing me what that looks like." Maya's throat tightened. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going back," he said. "To rebuild, to face what I ran from. I just didn't want to leave again without saying goodbye properly this time." She looked at him, tears welling again, but softer now. "Goodbyes don't get easier, do they?" He shook his head. "No, but maybe the right ones hurt less." Jack turned toward the door. Before he left, he placed one last sketch on the counter, a drawing of the diner glowing in the rain, a small figure inside by the window. At the bottom, he'd written, "You were the light when I forgot the sun." The bell jingled as he walked out into the drizzle. Maya stood there long after he was gone, holding the sketch to her chest. The rain outside had started again, soft, steady, forgiving. Spring came quietly to Asheville, brushing the mountains in green again. The air grew warmer, the streets busier, and the smell of rain gave way to blooming dogwoods. Life moved on, even if the heart sometimes stayed behind. It had been nearly a month since Jack left the Bluebird Diner that night. Maya told herself she was fine. Work was steady, the regulars kept her busy, and the world hadn't ended. But there were moments, quiet ones, when the sound of the doorbell made her heart jump, only to fall again when it wasn't him. Then, one Thursday afternoon, she walked into the diner to find someone already wiping tables. At first, she thought Carl had hired new help, but when the man turned, she froze. Jack. He was in a plain white t-shirt sleeves, rolled hair a little longer. No watch, no SUV, no walls. Just Jack. Maya's voice caught. "What are you doing here?" Carl looked up from the kitchen window. He asked if he could work a few shifts, said he wanted to help fix the place up. I figured why not free labor? Jack smiled nervously. "Don't worry, I'm not taking your tips." Maya blinked, still trying to understand. "You work here now?" "Just for a while," he said. "I figured it was time I did something that didn't have a paycheck attached to it." She didn't know whether to laugh or walk away, so she just grabbed a towel and started polishing silverware. "You don't have to prove anything, Jack." "I'm not," he said. "I just wanted to keep a promise." "What promise?" "That I'd start fixing what I broke." The next few weeks moved differently. Jack worked the early morning shifts when sunlight poured through the windows and the smell of pancakes filled the air. He wasn't the man who used to design machines or sit quietly sketching in the corner. He was just another person trying to belong again. At first, Maya kept her distance, but it was impossible not to notice the small things. He came in early, repaired the broken coffee machine, and painted over the chipped window frame. He took orders with quiet patience, learned the regulars' names, and even convinced Carl to bring back the blueberry pie on weekends. The diner began to feel lighter, and so did she. One morning, she found him on a ladder outside repainting the sign that hung above the door. The old letters "Bluebird Diner, open all night," had faded over time. "You missed a spot," she said, stepping outside with 2 cups of coffee. Jack turned smiling. "You're supposed to say thank you." "I'll say that after you finish." She handed him a cup. He climbed down, wiping his hands on his jeans before taking it. "Still can't believe Carl let you paint," she teased. "He barely lets me change the syrup flavors." Jack shrugged. "Guess he trusts me now." "Funny," she said. "Took me a little longer." He looked at her, the corners of his mouth softening. "I don't blame you." For a moment, silence stretched between them, comfortable, familiar, the kind that doesn't need filling. Maya sipped her coffee, glancing at the new paint on the sign. "You changed the tagline." Jack nodded. Where it once said, "Open all night," it now read, "Bluebird Diner, where warmth lives." She smiled faintly. "That was your idea, wasn't it?" He nodded again. It felt right. Over time, they began to talk again. Not about the past, never directly, but about the small things. The morning crowd, the funny customers, the weather. But sometimes, between words, their eyes met, and the quiet said what words couldn't. One night, after closing, Maya found him sitting on the back steps, the same spot where they'd once shared late coffees. The stars were out clear and bright, and the hum of distant traffic filled the still air. She sat beside him. "You know you're terrible at disappearing." He chuckled. "I decided I'm better at staying." "Good," she said softly, "because running doesn't suit you." Jack looked down at his hands. "I spent a long time thinking the only way to make things right was to rebuild everything I lost. But maybe it's not about rebuilding. Maybe it's just about showing up, even when you're still a little broken." Maya turned to him, her voice gentle. "That's how people heal, Jack. One small act at a time." He smiled, eyes glinting under the porch light. "Like soup." She laughed. "Exactly like soup." The following week, the diner hosted its annual spring cleanup. Locals came with paintbrushes and toolboxes. Jack coordinated repairs, Carl grilled burgers in the parking lot, and Maya ran the register like a conductor leading a band. At one point, she looked across the crowd and saw Jack laughing with a group of kids who were helping repaint the benches. The sight made something in her chest loosen, something she hadn't realized was still tight. When the day ended, the diner looked new again, glowing in the sunset. Carl locked the door and grinned. "Not bad, huh?" "Not bad at all," Maya said. Jack stood a few feet away, wiping his hands on a rag. He caught her looking and smiled, quiet, unspoken, grateful. That night, after everyone had gone home, Maya stayed behind to count the register. She found a note taped to the inside of the cash drawer written in Jack's handwriting. "You once said kindness doesn't fix everything." "Maybe not, but it's a good place to start." She folded the note, her eyes soft with tears. A week later, as she locked up after a long shift, she found Jack waiting outside with 2 cups of hot cocoa. "You forgot this," he said, handing her one. "What's the occasion?" she asked, smiling. "No occasion," he said. "Just wanted to say thank you for letting me stay, for letting me try again." She looked up at him, the streetlight casting a golden halo over his face. "You know, Jack, I never really stopped caring. I just needed time to remember why." He nodded slowly, and I think I remember now. He smiled a real unguarded smile and held out his hand. "Walk with me." Maya hesitated for half a heartbeat, then slipped her hand into his. They walked down Main Street in silence, their footsteps echoing softly against the pavement. The air was warm, the night gentle, and for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt like they were running anymore. Sometimes redemption isn't a grand gesture. It's the quiet decision to keep showing up, to choose warmth, to choose kindness, to choose each other. Summer rolled into Asheville with sunlight and the smell of blooming jasmine drifting through open windows. The Bluebird Diner was busier than ever, tourists snapping photos of the new sign, locals filling the booths every morning. It had been 3 months since Jack started working there. What began as temporary help had turned into something steadier, something that felt almost like home. Maya often caught herself smiling when she saw him behind the counter, pouring coffee for strangers, listening to their stories the same way he once listened to hers. There was a peace in him now, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. One Thursday evening, as the last customers trickled out, Jack wiped down the counter while Maya tallied the register. The radio hummed softly in the background. "You ever think about what's next?" she asked. Jack looked up. "For the diner or for us?" She smiled. "Both maybe." He leaned against the counter. "For the diner, I'm thinking new chairs, better coffee beans, and maybe a jukebox that doesn't die halfway through a song." Maya chuckled. "And for you?" Jack hesitated, then said quietly, "I think I want to stay." She froze, caught off guard. "Here." He nodded. "I've spent so long running from my past that I forgot what it's like to build something for the future. This place, it feels right." Maya's voice softened. "I think so too." A week later, the diner hosted its first anniversary since reopening. The crowd spilled out into the street, laughter mixing with live music from a local band. String lights twinkled above the parking lot, and the air smelled like grilled burgers and apple pie. Carl raised a toast. "To the Bluebird. May it keep flying as long as we've got coffee." Everyone cheered. Maya stood beside Jack, watching the glow of the lights reflect in his eyes. "You did good," she said. "We did," he corrected. For a long moment, neither spoke. The noise faded into the background, leaving only the hum of the night and the sound of her heart catching its rhythm again. Later that night, after the crowd had gone, the diner was quiet once more. The lights were low, the neon sign buzzing gently outside. Jack stepped out from the kitchen holding a small paper bag. "Close your eyes." Maya frowned. "Why?" "Just trust me." She did. When she opened them, he was holding a folded piece of paper, another sketch. This one showed the diner surrounded by sunlight, the windows open, flowers on the tables. In the corner, two figures stood side by side, one holding a coffee pot, the other holding a notebook. At the bottom he'd written, "Some stories don't end, they just keep growing." Maya smiled through tears. "It's beautiful." Jack took a slow breath. "I used to think redemption was about fixing everything I broke, but now I think it's about learning how to live again, and maybe, if you're lucky, finding someone who believes you can." She met his eyes. "And you found that here?" He nodded. "I found that in you." Her heart swelled, quiet but certain. For a while, they just stood there, surrounded by the soft hum of the diner and the faint sound of crickets outside. Then, without words, she stepped closer, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. Neither of them spoke, but they didn't need to. The silence said it all: peace, forgiveness, and something that felt a lot like love. Months later, as the first autumn leaves began to fall again, the Bluebird Diner became a local legend. People said it wasn't just the food that made it special, it was the feeling, the warmth, the sense that no matter who you were or where you came from, you belonged there. Sometimes, when a stranger wandered in late at night, tired, hungry, and soaked from the rain, Maya would bring them a bowl of soup without asking questions. And somewhere in the corner, Jack would smile, knowing that everything had come full circle. Because sometimes kindness doesn't just change one life, it creates a ripple that keeps moving, touching hearts long after the storm has passed. As the camera would fade out on their story, the lights of the diner glowing softly under the North Carolina sky, Maya's voice would return one last time, calm and reflective. They say a single act of kindness can change a life. Maybe that's true. Because the night I gave a stranger a bowl of soup, I didn't just feed someone hungry, I found someone who reminded me how to believe again. Soft piano fades in. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us sometimes love begins with something as simple as a bowl of soup. The screen fades to black, the sound of rain echoing faintly in the distance.